The U.S. and Iran now in a delicate holding pattern with a two-week ceasefire in place as negotiations begin to ramp up. Vice President J.D. Vance is headed to Pakistan for those talks for that nuclear peace deal to try and end the war. And joining us now to discuss is former Pentagon Deputy Secretary and former White House Communications Officer Teresa Morgenstern. Good morning to you, Teresa. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Good morning, Jan. Thank you for having me.
The administration says military objectives have now been met. They say there's now leverage for this deal. So tell me, what are your thoughts on that progress and on this current ceasefire with what could come next?
Yeah, absolutely. The objectives have been met. The United States has completely obliterated the Iranian military capability. There's no Air Force, there's no Navy. And by the way, President Trump and his administration has been able to do this in just 38 days. So this has been an incredible success. Obviously, we're still at the negotiating table, but President Trump has been able to do something that no other president has been able to do in 47 years.
Right. And Israel is supporting that ceasefire with Iran, but of course, making it clear this does not apply to what they're doing in Lebanon with Hezbollah as they continue those strikes. How much does that complicate these negotiations, though?
Well, I have to say, I think Iran is complicating the negotiations here. And part of our negotiating is that all proxies to Iran are part of this, are not going to be a part of this movement going forward. And Hezbollah is essentially a proxy of Iran. And so that is why Lebanon is not included in this ceasefire.
Yeah, very true. And with Iran now threatening the Strait of Hormuz yet again, how real is this risk that this ceasefire could fall apart? And how should Trump respond if it does?
Well, I like to say that President Trump and his team have access to information that you or I or the general public don't have access to. So only they know exactly what's going to happen next. But President Trump has been a strong negotiator with this, as well as his team with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. As you mentioned, the vice president is heading to Pakistan today to continue negotiations. So I think we're in a position now that we can still protect the Strait of Hormuz. But again, President Trump has been strong and he's not afraid to do what needs to be done in order to bring down the terrorist regime that Iran has.
Speaking of the information that's coming out, because obviously there's things going on behind the scenes we're not hearing about, that we're not privy to, how do you, though, get some of that disinformation out of the media? Because the president and of course, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt yesterday pretty heated about some news outlets reporting on this 10-point peace plan that the president never agreed to, that some news outlets said were part of this deal, part of this ceasefire. How do you begin to start making sure some of that disinformation gets sorted out so that people, like Americans, don't believe it to be true?
Right. And so, as you mentioned, there are some media outlets that have been putting out disinformation almost as a propaganda arm of what the Iranian regime wants to message out. And so what I have absolutely loved about what this administration has done during the entire Operation Epic Fury is how transparent they have been. We've seen weekly, almost daily press conferences from both the White House and the Pentagon. And so I would recommend to all media outlets, as somebody who has worked with the media before, is what the White House and the Pentagon are putting out are the facts. Please listen to them, because they're able to give you the most information that I don't think any other administration would be able to do in a situation like this.
What should we be watching for in those negotiations moving forward, and what would a real deal need to include?
The real deal needs to include no nuclear capability, absolutely, for sure. And I think that's probably on the table right now. And like I said, Vice President J.D. Vance is heading there today. I think we have maybe the bad cop with President Trump and good cop with Vice President Vance, but what we have is a unified front going forward, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of the negotiating table today.
All right, Teresa Morgenstern, appreciate you joining us this morning with your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you. New this morning, a potential shakeup of U.S. troops in Europe, with the White House now considering a major shift of American forces across NATO countries based on how they've helped the war effort. According to the Wall Street Journal, the War Department may move troops out of countries in the alliance that have not pulled their weight to countries that have backed the mission. The National News Desk's Christine Frizzau is live on Capitol Hill with the latest, and this would be very significant if this happened. Good morning to you.
Yeah, John, we've heard the president criticize NATO for years, but this potential action of moving troops would be significant. He has been vocal in his anger at countries like Spain, Italy, France, and Germany, which have either blocked the use of airspace or have criticized the war. There are about 84,000 U.S. troops across Europe. And the president posted on Truth Social, quote, "NATO wasn't there when we needed them, and they won't be there if we need them again." This just hours after meeting with NATO chief Mark Rutte at the White House.
Let me be absolutely clear. He is clearly disappointed with many NATO allies, and I can see his point. But at the same time, I was also able to point to the fact that the large majority of European nations has been helpful with basing, with logistics, with overflights, with making sure that they lived up to the commitments.
Is the world safer today than it was before the war was started?
Absolutely, because, and this is thanks to President Trump's leadership.
Now, let's be clear, President Trump would need the approval of Congress to pull out of NATO, and that support doesn't appear to be there. But moving troops is something it seems he can do. The one thing some NATO countries are assisting in is the effort to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. This is a delicate time for a historically close partnership that could really reshape the entirety of the world order. I'm Christine Frizzell for the National News Desk.
This morning, the Iranian regime already testing limits, floating new demands, and trying to rewrite terms on the ceasefire deal with those high-stakes negotiations set to begin in less than 24 hours. Good morning, and thanks for joining us. This is the National News Desk. America's News Now. I'm Jan Jeffcoat. It is Thursday, April 9th, and we want to now welcome our Charge viewers live with us on the East Coast and recorded on the West. Right now, that fragile ceasefire under pressure as Iran's terror proxies continue strikes and Israel moves forward with its own operation in Lebanon. The U.S. and Israel making it clear Lebanon was never part of the deal, and Iran's trying to push back, threatening once again to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Despite all those threats, though, ships and oil tankers are still moving through that critical waterway as the price of oil drops and the stock market continues to soar. We are covering all angles for you this morning. Matt Galka is standing by in Washington with what this means for your money. But we start with Mark Boyle at the live desk. Good morning to you, Mark. President Trump also said he is still confident he's going to reach a longer peace term deal, a longer deal with Iran.
That's the goal he's been pushing for this, Jan. He is confident that he can get things done. So a lot of pressure this weekend on the negotiators in all of this. They certainly have their work cut out for them. It's going to be a big test for Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Vice President J.D. Vance will be there as well, leading the delegation in these peace talks that will happen in Pakistan. This morning, the ceasefire deal could be in jeopardy, though, after Israel continues to attack Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. Iran threatening to call the whole thing off if these attacks continue, but the U.S. and Israel say Iran is mistaken here, thinking that ceasefire extends to Hezbollah.
I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states.
Now, because of the continued attacks on Lebanon, Iran is threatening to cut off tanker traffic in the Strait once again. There are also reports this morning that Iran closed the waterway this morning, but the White House has come out and said that is not true. We'll track what happens with this deal over the next few days. Jan.
Mark, thank you. This morning, a media firestorm over who's telling the truth about a ceasefire deal, with some mainstream outlets getting blasted for their reporting. In a post online, President Trump singled out the New York Times and CNN after he said they reported on this fake 10-point plan from Iran designed to undercut the negotiations, he said. Trump said every single point was made up and part of an effort to sabotage the real progress.
Seen a lot of inaccurate coverage today from the media about these negotiations and these plans already. So let me be clear and correct the record. The Iranians originally put forward a 10-point plan that was fundamentally unserious, unacceptable, and completely discarded. It was literally thrown in the garbage by President Trump and his negotiating team. Many outlets in this room have falsely reported on that plan as being acceptable to the United States, and that is false. And the idea that President Trump would ever accept an Iranian wish list as a deal is completely absurd.
The White House also slamming Iran for once again threatening to shut down the Strait of Hormuz just hours after it reopened. Overnight, Iranian state-run media spread propaganda claiming sea mines were planted in the strait, which of course would be a clear violation of that agreement. But here's what we're actually seeing this morning. Ships and tankers still moving through that critical waterway without any incident, and it's already having an impact. Industry leaders say oil prices could drop even faster now if this holds.
The minute we settled something, it went down $20 a barrel. And right now, we're still in a risk period. The risk period is the next, let's see what happens in the next 2 weeks. Once that risk period goes away, it's going to go down another $20 a barrel. It'll get closer to the $65 a barrel that we were pre-war. And
all of that is dependent on the free flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz.
Absolutely. And I talked to my friend Nicholas Tsakos, the Greek tycoon, the shipping tycoon. And right now, the ships are moving.
And that momentum did show up on Wall Street yesterday with a huge day for the markets. The Dow did surge 1,325 points yesterday. S&P rose 166. NASDAQ increased by 617 points, marking one of the best days for those markets since last spring.
I'm Atra El-Nashar in Washington. The 2-week ceasefire with Iran starting off on shaky ground. Iran claims the U.S. is violating terms of the deal by not stopping Israeli strikes on Lebanon that left hundreds dead Wednesday. We're also learning Vice President Vance will lead a U.S. delegation to Islamabad for negotiations with Iran starting Saturday morning. In less than 24 hours, President Trump went from warning a whole civilization will die tonight to a big day for world peace. Day one of a 2-week ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran.
The Iranians have agreed to open up the straits. The United States has agreed to stop attacking. And that, not just the United States, but also our allies, have agreed to stop attacking. And that is the basis of this fragile truce that we have.
President Trump confirms Lebanon is not included. Heavy smoke seen here billowing out of Beirut after Israel says it executed their largest strikes across Lebanon since the war with Iran started. Lebanese health authorities say more than 250 people were killed and more than 1,100 wounded on Wednesday alone. Iran's foreign minister says the Iran-U.S. ceasefire terms are clear and explicit. The U.S. must choose ceasefire or continued war via Israel. It cannot have both. The world sees the massacres in Lebanon. The ball is in the U.S. court, and the world is watching whether it will act on its commitments. In response, Iran again closing the Strait of Hormuz, Iranian state media said.
That is completely unacceptable. And again, this is a case of what they're saying publicly is different privately. We have seen an uptick of traffic in the strait today.
Additionally, Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who was instrumental in brokering the ceasefire, posting Wednesday morning, violations of ceasefire have been reported at few places across the conflict zone, which undermine the spirit of peace process. The ceasefire not yet changing America's ramped-up military presence in the Middle East.
We'll be hanging around. We're not going anywhere.
Among all that's left to negotiate, removing enriched uranium from the Iranian regime's possession, which could be used to make a nuclear weapon, is among the trickiest to execute.
That is a red line that the president is not going to back away from.
Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will join Vice President Vance for negotiations with Iran in Islamabad this weekend. Iran's ambassador to the UN saying Wednesday they will participate to see how serious the United States is. In Washington, I'm Atra El-Nashar.